Hi and welcome to the All Things ITSM podcast. We're coming to you from FUSION15 in New Orleans. I'm Kirsty McGowan. I'm here with Mark Smalley.
Kirsty.
Carlos Casanova.
Hello, Kirsty.
And we're going to chat with Julie Mohr now.
Call me Jules.
Jules.
Okay,
Jules.
Jules.
Welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that people, IT people, certainly seem to struggle with is translating their efforts in terms of things that are really significant for the business. And I gather that you've had some experience in that area. How do you approach that?
You know, it's interesting because when we talk about service management, the whole philosophy behind service management is tying it to the outcomes of the business, and yet it seems to be the thing that's the most elusive for most organizations. So when the business comes and says, you know, we want this strategy, we want to engage in this way, and you know, we're making decisions within IT that aren't necessarily translating into that value or tied to those strategic objectives. I recently finished a project where the organization said, you know, can you come help us improve our measurement? And I took a look at what they were doing, and the recommendation was that there's really nothing wrong with what you're measuring today. I can't really highlight anything that's relevant to improve. The problem is your data. The data was so mixed and blended that, you know, when you look at from a service management perspective, what do we glean out of incident management and how does that translate into outcomes for the business or problem management or change management? If the organization is not capturing that information in a reliable way, then everything is a hypothetical. I think this is what's happening, and yeah, we can trend it over time and we can make decisions based on that. But really tying it to something that translates to value really requires data that's clean and that does tie IT to the business. So, you know, one of the major things that I talked to the organization about was, you know, better defining the processes, but also thinking about what are the decisions that we need to make and how do they relate to the business so that as you're making changes and you're improving the environment, you're then beginning to create a clean repository of data that supports that.
Yeah.
And then, you know, connecting it back to the business is never easy, but you at least got to start from a place where you've got decent data to launch from.
Yeah, and do you see IT departments doing that in splendid isolation, or do they manage to engage their business partners to sort of work out the... I've seen that happen so much.
No, it's a great question.
We'll tell the business later.
Yeah, no, it's a great question because I just finished, my talk here at the conference was on measurement in the cloud. And there's so little that's produced today around how to measure success with cloud services. And it's because the people that are really focused on generating measurements are the cloud providers. So they have a contract and they say, you know, this is what translates into value for us and meaningful between our relationship. And I'm like, well, hold on.
Meaningful in terms of we're satisfying the contract.
Exactly.
And the money's going to come in. That's
exactly.
Right.
But even though I put something into the cloud doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not still accountable for that part of the overall service delivery. So it's a very new area where we're talking about the customer cloud, your internal IT, your infrastructure cloud, and connecting all of that and putting your service management processes across that, and how important it is to think about that as a strategy ahead of the game. So that, you know, you're not just pushing stuff on the cloud to get the cost savings, which is important to the business, but at the same time, are you still getting your governance? Is the risk managed effectively? What's happening when you have incidents related to security or things like that? So it's never an easy equation, and we're our own worst enemy, right? Because we keep creating more complexity. And really, the reality is we should be more simplifying what we're doing and making targeted changes within the organization based upon reliable information that translates into that value to the business. So it's not easy, whether it's internal, external, or we just don't seem to put a lot of thought into it ahead of the game, which would really benefit us.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned internal, external. One of the interesting topics that I think people are moving towards is exploring customer experience. How do you get your hands around that? Because increasingly we are trying to give the customers a great experience. What's your take on that?
Customer experience is its own domain of knowledge. It's a very well-defined practice area, very much focused on external customers just across broad businesses, products and services, creating a brand and being able to carry that brand through all of your channels. Service management is fundamentally focused on customer satisfaction. How do we keep our customers happy? And there's a big difference between happy customers and engineering and experience. And one of the things that I've really kind of focused in this area is saying, okay, well, let's look at that theory of customer experience management and see how it translates into a service management world. And when I look at something like incident management, where you go from taking a call or creating a transaction through self-service, and the life cycle that we create in incident management, the resolution and the closure and how we're managing it. Customer experience is not about, making sure that you get a 4.5 on a 5.0 rating. It's about taking each one of those steps in that process and say, okay, what can go wrong right here? And what can we do to impact that? So if a customer comes in and their email is down, they're going to be upset. There's no way you can make them happy at that moment. Even if you smile or say something wonderful over the phone, they're unhappy, email went down. Customer experience management says, we're going to have those ebbs and flows. And what we need to do is acknowledge when something negative happens and apply something that we can do to change that person's perception of that event, so that at the end of that experience, we have someone who's an advocate. Yeah. And so service management just it's more of an outcome-based, and let's apply willy-nilly along the way to try to make people happier, when the reality is in incident management, when they call in, they are not happy. Yeah. I mean, things have gone down.
And I had an experience a couple of weeks ago flying back from a client site. We were delayed, it was 15 minutes, and the gate attendant was, doing a great job keeping everyone informed. But there was just a certain point that she just wasn't aware of what was going on, why it was delayed and whatnot. And the pilot eventually came on and just totally open, totally transparent. I wasn't happy that it was 2 hours later, but you know what? The frustration with the airline being delayed pretty much went away. To the point that I tweeted, I don't know if it was Delta or United or whatever, basically the pilot did, the ideal job in, just settle, and everyone was, they were satisfied. They weren't happy they were going home late, but the experience was no longer a real frustration, like, oh, I'm running late. It was, it was bad, but it was okay. Yeah,
you can really turn around a bad experience and actually win support from your customers by handling it properly.
And I'll take that example and I'll say that I've been on plenty of airlines where they go and they communicate and it turns it into a worse situation. Yeah. Yep, like you want to know that the airplane has parts that aren't working. Right. Oh, gee, let's take off now. And that's important because there is a distinction. We're just not communicating. Right. We're owning that experience at that moment and we're converting it to a positive one. So it's just enough information to make you feel better about what's going on, or at least making it informed, but not turning it into more of a negative situation. So and it's, when you see great products and services that are incredibly well branded, that customer experience from the day you look at an Apple product, the packaging. From the second you look at the packaging, everything about that is an experience. Yes. They do that incredibly well, but it carries through to their website, it carries through to the user interface, it carries through to their support organization. And that's what a branded experience is meant to be like. And we're a long ways away from that in service management.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. You think? We have an opportunity, though, to really brand that experience. I think about incident management as a Band-Aid. It's what we do when things go wrong. And all too often we spend too much time trying to perfect something that is a Band-Aid. And we've got like really large SpongeBob Band-Aids that are like really cool.
Band-Aid factories.
Yes. But we don't really turn that around to say, what do we do to really improve the customer experience? And that means using that information and feeding it back to design and fundamentally building better products and services that don't fail in the first place.
Customer experience engineering sounds like an alien discipline to most IT service management people. If you want to improve your customer experience, how would you approach that? Would you get a specialist from outside? You have to get somebody into your team?
It's really, and I've put together a methodology for doing this, where you take your process map within incident management and you look at all the customer touch points and you say, okay, what can happen at this point that can be a negative influencer and what can happen as a positive influencer? And it's really, all the studies have said, your processes, your tools, everything else, the thing that makes the biggest difference in customer experience management is your people. Well-trained, incredibly, valuable people to our customers, but also to creating those positive experiences. So, when we talk about engineering the experience, it's about empowering them to do something different at one of those moments. Like I said, somebody calls, their angry email went down, they're frustrated. So empathy is the right thing to do, but it's not enough. No. What can we do? Well, we can't give them a free iPad or something like that, but there are ways for us to look at how to engineer that experience to make those, interactions as positive, but also how could we make a difference? What if I went to the desktop instead of doing this on the phone? I can clearly see that this person is well past their ability to manage that. Let me have someone come up there. You don't do it every time, but there are ways that we can empower our staff to really. They're the ones that can understand the dynamics of the situation and know when something is needed instead of the traditional process flow.
In other words, an IT service management unit with a bit of guidance, like you just alluded to, could start on the journey.
And you don't need special skills. All you got to do is pick up the phone one time and call the service desk, and you can be put through the ringer, and then you know exactly, okay, so here's what happened. I did an engagement over in Israel, and I asked them for a customer that really liked their services and one that really didn't. And I went through, and I sat and I listened, and I said, explain to me what happened during the experience. And they were very similar. One customer, though, said, I still like the company, I'll still do business with them. The other one said, if I could find a competitive product, I can't, but if I could, I would be gone immediately. And I took these two and I said, to their management, look at the differences between here, look at what made the difference. They were pushing everything through self-service, and all that happened was the engineer picked up the phone and called them. And their model didn't support it, and financially it was more expensive to do, but it changed an experience.
And it kept a customer.
And the executive said to me, but this isn't a representative sample of all of our customers. And I said, but it is an example of what can go right and what can go seriously wrong. And there's a lot to be learned about how do we as an organization empower people to keep them in the upswing, moving towards something that's much more positive. It's a different situation every time. To think that a cookie cutter process is somehow going to create happy customers at the end of it every time, it's just not going to happen.
Well,
thank you, Jules.
Yeah.